You're listening to Crashes, Claims, and Clarity, hosted by Daryl Burrow, a Georgia-based personal injury attorney with over 30 years of experience and founder of Burrow and Associates. With a background in both legal strategy and compassionate client care, Daryl has helped over 10,000 individuals and families navigate life after injury. Guided by his Christian faith and a deep sense of justice, he brings expert insight, personal stories, and powerful interviews to every episode. If you're looking for truth, support, and clarity in the aftermath of an accident, this is your place. This is Crashes, Claims, and Clarity.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crashes, Claims, and Clarity. I'm your host, Daryl Burrow, founder of the law firm of Burrow and Associates. We're headquartered here in Gwinnett County in the state of Georgia, serving the entire state of Georgia. Today, we are joined by Dr. Todd George. He is a licensed clinical psychologist and evaluation specialist with Atlanta Psychological Services. He's conducted more than 3,800 comprehensive psychological evaluations for children, adolescents, and adults, helping patients gain clarity about all different types of conditions, be it trauma, anxiety, complex behavioral and emotional conditions. He has extensive experience in forensic psychology and has served as an expert witness in Georgia courts. And I just learned he's done that more than 100 times. And those testimonies involve parental fitness, psychosexual evaluations, and other complex legal matters. His passion is helping individuals and families move from uncertainty to clear answers through evidence-based psychological assessments and practical recommendations. Well, Dr. George, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, I'd like to launch right into these questions that we have today, and hopefully this will be very informative and very helpful for our audience. Many people think that injuries from a crash are only physical. How often do you see the emotional trauma following an accident?
It's quite common. Often, it's quite common. It's more common than most people would realize. Motor vehicle accidents are actually one of the leading causes of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Depending on the research study that you look at, the prevalence rates of PTSD from accident survivors ranges from like 6% to 39%. And there's even greater percentages of those that develop acute stress disorder or phobias of driving. So it is quite common.
Okay. And what are some of the earliest warning signs that someone may be experiencing psychological trauma after a wreck or some other type of injury?
That's a great question. In the immediate aftermath, like one of the things that we look for when assessing for these clinical conditions is hyperarousal, which is an exaggerated startle response, like being on edge or having a racing heartbeat just at the thought of a car or an accident, if that's the original trauma. You also frequently see intrusive symptoms like nightmares or replaying the crash in your head over and over again on a loop. Another thing that we see is avoidance. And so that may be withdrawal or from family. It may be taking detours around where the crash site happened or avoiding getting into a car at all. So those are some of the main things that we would look for these kind of concerns.
Okay, good segue into the next question about not wanting to drive again. When does that become something that the person or family might notice that they need to seek out some professional help?
Yeah, generally a good rule of thumb is about a month after an accident. If there's still persistent nightmares or avoidance of driving or being in the accident area, if those symptoms are continuing to go on, or if there's anxiety that's just not getting better after about a month, that's when it's time to probably seek that's when it's time to seek a psychological evaluation to see if any kind of treatment or diagnosis is warranted.
Okay. And How does untreated anxiety or the PTSD affect the physical healing or someone's actual pain, physical pain?
Mm, Yeah, that's a great question. And while I'm not a medical doctor, being a psychologist, we do know that there is a mind body connection there. That when somebody has PTSD that's not treated, or if they have severe anxiety, their body's flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and chronic elevations of those stress hormones can actually cause inflammation and cause the physical healing and tissue development to be delayed in healing. And anxiety itself also can impact and make our pain threshold lower. So it can cause those issues to persist.
Wow. The families surrounding loved ones often don't understand what that person is going through emotionally after an accident. What advice would you give to those, be it a spouse or a parent or a caregiver or other loved one?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the first things that I tell parents or even friends of family members that have had some kind of traumatic experiences first is validate their experience. It's easy to think you'd want to say, oh, well, you survived, just be grateful. But if you can really recognize and acknowledge that they've been through something really terrifying and validate that to them, that's one of the areas that can be really helpful. The other thing is to be patient because healing from a trauma is not something that follows like a neat timeline. It's different for everybody. And so being patient with that is very helpful. And then finally, another thing is looking for like subtle shifts in behaviors. And so increased irritability or changes in sleeping or withdrawn behaviors. Those kinds of things can be what people notice or that what parents may notice. And you can also gently encourage them if they're seeing some of these symptoms to seek a psychological evaluation so that they can determine if any kind of treatment would be beneficial.
That's a great advice. I've got four bullet points that I made that I'm going to take away for sure. Children process trauma differently than adults. What behaviors should parents watch for after a child has been involved in either a wreck or an accident or some other trauma?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Children don't process trauma the way that maybe adults do. Like they don't sit down and talk about their feelings. We often see it through their behaviors. And so one of the things that what may be noticeable is like a regression in the child's
Hmm.
behaviors. For example, like one of the signs of trauma can be example of a child that was fully toilet trained and then they have this accident and then they all of a sudden start wetting the bed or they start losing skills that they previously mastered. You can see that regression there. And another piece too is that kids tend to like process their experiences through their play when they don't have like the cognitive or the verbal skills to actually do that. And so what you'll sometimes see in kids that are traumatized is they'll repetitively reenact whatever the situation is with their toys. And so if it's like a car accident, you may see them repetitively just like banging cars together and just like continuing that over and over again. It depends on what the traumatic experience was, but that's another aspect that you may see in kids that have experienced trauma that are struggling with that.
Would your time frame for evaluation and treatment be the same, or is that slightly different when you're dealing with a young child like that?
I think
30 days or
Yeah, I mean, usually about the month mark is about the time that you would want to seek an evaluation. If it's been going on repetitively, or like if there's a change in their behaviors that aren't improving, especially in children, like, you'd want to get that evaluation as soon as you could just to make sure that all of their bases are being covered and that they're being supported.
okay. A lot of people say after a wreck or injury, I'm fine, even though they may be struggling emotionally. Why do you think so many people ignore their mental health after one of these traumatic events?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different reasons. I mean, first of all, the medical system tends to prioritize the physical injury. So, like fixing the broken bone or stopping the bleeding. So, sometimes mental health can be pushed into the back burner, so to speak. Secondly, there's delayed onset. I mean, sometimes especially in an accident, like you have an adrenaline rush that may mask like the emotional concerns or the shock that's going on. And then the symptoms might not peak until weeks later. And then Finally, there's also still stigma around it. There's, the concept that many people view psychological stress as a weakness or a sign of weakness. And so oftentimes people would say, I'm going to grit my teeth and I'm going to be fine and I'm going to push through it. And so sometimes just the stigma of mental health can prevent them from
Hmm.
actually getting the help they need.
Unfortunately, that's still one of the issues, it sounds like.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
I think we may have answered this one. At what point should someone consider seeing a psychologist instead of assuming that the symptoms will just eventually go away? We might reiterate that.
Yeah, I mean, a good rule of thumb is about the 1 month mark. So if it's been 4 weeks and there's someone still having nightmares or they're avoiding driving or they're being detached from their loved ones, those kinds of things, that's when it would be time to seek an evaluation. Or if somebody is experiencing anxiety and they're trying to numb that with like drugs or alcohol,
Oh,
that will be a more immediate time to contact a psychologist to be able to have an evaluation to figure out what may be going on.
it sounds like it might, that's more of like a crisis that people should recognize and do something immediately, it sounds like.
Yes, I mean, and like if there's like drugs and alcohol that are being used to numb their anxiety, then that's a primary concern. But it's also, it would be more of an immediate situation if they're at risk of, if their anxiety and those symptoms are causing them to risk their relationships or their job status, those kinds of things. If it's starting to impair those areas, then that would also be a reason to get evaluation sooner than later.
Have you seen any connection between like these type of injuries that people suffer and maybe leading to self-harm?
I mean, self harm does happen. I mean, in cases where there's been traumatic experiences, and it just varies from person to person if that becomes a problem.
And again, obviously, that would be a crisis situation that they would need intervention and help.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
What practical strategies can people begin using immediately after they've had one of these events to support both their emotional and physical recovery?
Yeah. And so, again, I mean, while I am a psychologist, and part of what I do is give people strategies for how to manage these kinds of situations. But generally speaking, one of the first things to do is prioritize your sleep. That might be something that is easily to neglect. And because what's understood is like the brain processes trauma in part through REM sleep. And so making sure that you're getting enough sleep is one of the ways that you can kind of be proactive and getting some of that help that you need and what you need to do. The other piece is in some places like you can also practice graded exposure. If the doctor or your physician hasn't told you not to drive, one of the first steps you can do in this is to just go and sit in the car for a few minutes. Or, after you've done that, if you feel comfortable, maybe drive around the block and basically just gradually expose yourself to the car again to help retrain your brain that it's safe to be in the car, because our brain's defense mechanisms will oftentimes cause us to avoid things that have harmed us in the past. And
Mm.
you sometimes have to retrain that to show yourself that it's safe again.
Mm. And obviously, you mentioned stay away from things that are crutches like alcohol or drugs. Any correlation you've seen to diets that might help people as well?
Not specifically. I mean, the general rule of thumb, like with all mental health, is maintaining a healthy diet and sleep, and maintaining the healthy practices that are recognized just for general health. Those things also help with mental health.
Right. And finally, if you could leave our listeners with one message about protecting their mental health after a traumatic event like this, what would that be?
Yeah, my final message would be that psychological injuries are just as real as physical injuries, and they need the same kind of, or even similar types of professional care that physical injuries would. And so, I mean, just as an example, like you wouldn't expect a broken bone to heal properly without a cast and physical therapy. You want to give
Right.
your brain and your mind the same grace and make sure that you're receiving the kind of treatment that you need if you have one of these concerns related to accidents or injuries.
Yeah, that's great advice today. I certainly have some bullet points and some great takeaways. I hope this has been helpful for a lot of people or anybody that listens. Thank you so much, Dr. George, for joining me. It's been very informative.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Crashes, Claims, and Clarity with attorney Daryl Burrow, founder of Burrow & Associates and a trusted advocate for over 30 years. If today's episode helped bring clarity or hope after an accident, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. To connect with Daryl or learn more, visit legalatlanta.com. Join us next week for another honest, faith-centered conversation about recovery, rights, and moving forward after injury.